Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IBM Qiskit Live Quantum Seminar Series. In just a minute, I will be thrilled to roll out this week's seminar with Jens Eisert. I am so glad that you joined us on time. Before we begin with introductions, we love to give everyone just about a minute or two to tune into the live stream. And meanwhile, folks, you know my favorite question, which is, where are you tuning in from today? California, New York, Europe, or other places. And I can't list all of them. So let us know in the chat. That's the same place where you can ask questions of Jens and myself during the talk live, and we can bring those questions up and try to keep this very interactive. It's the same place where you can discuss and answer each other's questions. And I see that today we have folks from Germany, Michigan, Santa Barbara, Kelly, Santa Barbara, New York, and it's good to make and see folks from all over the different time zones, even as far as Taiwan and Pittsburgh. Now, folks, we do this every Friday at noon Eastern Time. This talk will stay recorded, so you can go back and rewatch it, but you can only ask questions and discuss with each other live as we go through our live session. I also want to have this chance to congratulate Charlie Bennett and all of the colleagues who had the pleasure of winning the Breakthrough Prize yesterday. Big congratulations from the whole team here. And with that, I think it's time we get to it. I'm thrilled to roll out the latest episode of the IBM Qiskit Live Quantum Seminar Series dedicated to you, the research and academic communities. I'm your host, Zlatko Minev from IBM Quantum Research, and today I have the special pleasure and privilege of hosting Jens Eisert, who will speak on a single T-gate makes distribution learning hard. Jens is an ERC fellow and professor at Free University of Berlin. From 2001, Jens was a Fedor Linen Fellow at Imperial College, after which he held many positions at Caltech, Potsdam, Imperial University, Free University of Berlin, and many others. Jens is a name known to all of us here, most likely. Jens has many prizes, including the Yersai, Yuri, Google NISC, and many more. I'll keep the list short in the interest of time. Jens, it's a real pleasure to have you here today. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm great. Good to see you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever you say in these times. It's getting a bit funny, but I suppose good morning for you, good evening for me. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Jens. And before we hand it over to you, just tell us where are you tuning in to today from?
In fact, I'm now in Berlin, like my home base, the capital of Germany, and it's kind of a wonderful late summer evening. So that's where I am at the moment. Not in Santa Barbara, unfortunately, but
next year. So with that, yeah. Jens, stage is yours.
Oh, you're too kind. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for the invitation to this truly wonderful online talk series. It's also great to see you here. In fact, just a few hours before the QRP submission deadline, where the quantum information world presumably stops turning for a couple of hours. So that's much appreciated. So in this talk, we quite frankly will see that a single T-gate can make quantum distribution learning hard. So more to the point, we will try to see in what way, in what sense we can help quantum devices to exhibit quantum advantages in meaningful and mathematically well-defined machine learning tasks beyond classical capabilities. So one of the reasons we are so excited these days is that quantum computers not only promise advantages in meaningful computational tasks, but in fact, this promise seems to be moving closer and closer to reality, creating a lot of interest in the field, mostly for good reasons, I'm tempted to say. But indeed, recent years have seen substantial progress in hardware development, and IBM is surely one of the leading protagonists in this exciting development. Now, that's great, but the elephant in the room, of course, is the question whether we can hope noisy and realistic, warm and wet, maybe not wet, but warm quantum devices to provide some sort of computational speed up over classical computers. Now, for very much paradigmatic problems, there seems to be strong evidence that this might indeed be the case. So the simplest, presumably simplest experiment you can do is that you go into the lab. Well, not me, somebody else goes into the lab. Never let a theorist into the lab. But when you go into the lab and like take raw data in a sampling experiment, and there are certain fine-tuned sampling experiments where which one can do, where one can show that you cannot classically resample from a similar distribution, or sampling up to a constant error in the total variation distance is classically hard, but you can do the sampling experiments. So this cannot only be done, but this has been done to great publicity. I was actually in Santa Barbara at the time, and your Google friends were kind of putting out the data, and it was funny, like how literally every Uber driver and every free shopping center newspaper would be talking about this as the talk of the town. So there's some settings where you can do sampling, but the classical resimulation of the same or a similar distribution is not efficiently possible under meaningful and quite mild complexity theoretic assumptions. So that's wonderful. It's actually intricate and funny. There's a lot of stuff to say. We just put out a review article on this subject matter. I'm very happy to get feedback on that. Like focusing on the complexity theoretic fine print of the question, but also looking at questions of experimental realization and classical simulation of these settings. Also, verification is quite subtle. One can do linear cross entropy benchmarking, which is sample efficient but computationally inefficient. There is like obstructions to black box verification, meaning you cannot just go into the lab and take raw data and judge from the data alone whether you've done the right thing, which kind of creates a bit of a tension and adds some spice to the question that just in a black box fashion, you can't verify the correctness of these sampling schemes, which gives rise to an interesting state of affairs. If one is willing to trust devices to some extent, like if you allow to do quantum measurements, you can do experiments. You can even do sampling experiments that show a quantum advantage, that have the property that you can not only take data and build trust in the device, but you can really literally verify the functioning of the device in the sense that you can really bound the very same quantity that enters the complexity theoretic arguments, and you can think of a kind of quantum verifiable quantum advantage scheme. A variant thereof we just did together with our friends in Innsbruck, doing like a trapped ion setting, like with the group of Blood and Mons, looking at stuff of this type. Together, like thinking of a small scale proof of principle experiment that would show a quantum advantage that can be in a way verified. That's great, and it's surely very encouraging. It shows, like it sharpens the mind what a quantum advantage could be. It's also a showcase of technological development. But to be fair, these sampling experiments are not really practical applications in their own right. You want to really kind of relate to a problem of practical impact in one way or the other. So people are thinking a lot on what next, what to think about, and that what the next interesting question could be depends a lot on who you ask. Like if you ask people with a physics background, when they're supposed to say what are the interesting developments, they would often say that we should really think about programmable quantum simulators that are in a way intermediate between digital full-scale quantum computers and analog simulators that have been developed for so long now, and look at this intermediate range and see to what extent these can be used for practical applications. Then more like from the algorithmic side, people are thinking a lot about variational quantum algorithms with a kind of a medium-sized quantum computer sitting there in the center and a larger classical computer around that would kind of tune the variational parameters where you take measurements, and you would kind of update these variational parameters in later steps of the algorithm in a variational quantum eigensolver flavor, or in a hope to better approximate certain instances of combinatorial optimization problems or even think of like approximations of computationally hard classical problems. Or one can think of instances of quantum-assisted machine learning, which makes a lot of sense given the enormous impact machine learning has to the world. And one can meaningfully ask, could there be a scope for quantum devices to help to assist in meaningful and mathematically well-defined machine learning tasks? And this is what we have in mind for this talk. Now, there can be little denying that machine learning has changed the world we live in. It's like ubiquitous in any kind of speech or pattern recognition, in any algorithm that takes data and would make predictions based on earlier training data, let this be in the supervised or unsupervised or reinforcement learning flavor. It's basically in any algorithm that we are kind of facing on the everyday level today. So given the importance of machine learning in modern life, one can ask whether quantum devices could possibly help here, and whether in one way or the other there could be a scope for quantum-assisted machine learning. Now, that's a big question, and that's maybe too big a question to capture. So what does it even mean to have a quantum advantage in a learning task? So ideally, this could mean that we have some sort of, or we could dream, I mean, I'm still young enough to dream, I could dream of having a rigorous guarantee of, like, for a state-of-the-art learning algorithm that's kind of run on practically minded and real-world data sets. So we can think of, I don't know, pictures of cats and dogs that can't be missed in any talk that mentions machine learning, stock market data, protein configurations, or any meaningful data that we want to base our training on. Then we can think of an algorithm like stochastic gradient descent, expectation maximization, or so, like an algorithm that would kind of be trained on the data at hand, and some model like neural networks, parameterized quantum circuits that are quite important in this field, or probabilistic graphical models or so. And for any of the setting or data set, an algorithm and a model, we could think or like anticipate that quantum algorithms could possibly help in like learning tasks of this type. Now, and then of course we would like to see some sort of quantum advantage of the quantum learner over the classical learner. So what does that mean? Again, this can mean many things. So we could use fewer samples to learn the same thing. We take pictures of cats and dogs, and then we are like with fewer samples we can train our device. That would be an advantage in sample complexity over the quantum over the classical learner. Or there could be an advantage in computational complexity, which means that the quantum learner would need fewer computational steps to learn to achieve the learning tasks. We could also think of advantages in generalization, which abounds to the performance on like given unseen data, or other meaningful ways of having a quantum advantage over a classical device. Even better would be a setting where we can think of like classical lower bounds. We kind of push from below and say, this is what we have here, and quantum upper bounds, and be like very specific on the quantum sides, and fix a very specific algorithm like stochastic gradient descent or so, and a like very well-defined model like a parameterized quantum circuit. So we be very specific on that side and have an explicit package of algorithm and model in mind. But for the classical side, be very generous and forgiving and think of all conceivable classical learners, all models, all algorithms, and ask, could this specific quantum setting be better than any conceivable classical learner for the same well-defined learning task. So that's kind of the dream scenario we would want to see, where a kind of a specific quantum device, a quantum algorithm, would outperform all possible classical learners for the same task. Now, this is clearly a very honest and nice setting. It's also a very demanding setting. So for the first technical part of this talk, we will kind of stick to that setting, but we will be forgiving in one way, and I say this very clearly so that I'm not kind of overselling anything. So we are in the setting that I'm anticipating, but we are looking at a very much like specific and fine-tuned data set. So we will ask the question whether we can make substantial progress on this question for fine-tuned data sets where we take the liberty of kind of tailoring the distributions to our task at hand. That's what we can do. But again, we want a proper advantage of the specific classical setting over all possible classical learners for the same task and also for the specific data set. And this is what we look at in the first technical part of the talk, where we ask whether we can think of a proven quantum advantage in so-called PAC distribution learning tasks. So what is this? So what we have in mind here is the task of distribution learning. And a moment of thought reveals that actually many meaningful tasks or problems in machine learning can, at the end of the day, be captured in the form of wanting to learn a probability distribution in one way or the other. So a generator would take of a distribution, or rather a family of distributions, think of a concept class or a family of distributions indexed by some n, like think of a system size in a certain way. So all I'm saying will be about meaningful families of probability distributions. And the generator would take seed randomness, like you roll a dice and then you take this random number, and the generator shoots out a specimen from the distribution at hand, say pictures of cats and dogs. The number comes in and boom, comes the picture of a cat and dog. And the task of the learner is to show and to find out, to learn what has been going on. So that the learner takes data, these pictures of cats and dogs if you want, and stares at them and learns the distribution at the end of the day. This can mean several things. For example, in density modeling, it would mean that the learner would learn the actual probabilities and would find a good approximation of the actual probabilities of the distribution, or rather the family of distributions that are being fed in. And there's something to say about this, but I will swallow this mostly for the biggest chunk of the talk. I might say something about this when there's questions, but what we, for most of the talk, have in mind is so-called generator modeling, where the generator spits out data, and the task of the learner is to do generator modeling in the sense that the generator should learn what's going on and should be able to spit out data from pretty much the same distribution. So the task is to learn a generator, gen D, of some distribution, or again, a family of distributions. So, can there be a quantum advantage? So are there distributions that are efficiently quantum generator learnable, but are not efficiently classical generator learnable? Again, in the sense that we think of a quantum algorithm on the quantum side, for which we can show that no classical learner can learn the same distribution. So let's be a little bit more pedantic here. The setting we are slightly more precisely in is that of PAC learning. That's a nice framework, but I'm basically saying the same thing as I said before, but in a slightly more pedantic language. Well, I'm in Germany, so it's good to be a bit pedantic. So the probably approximately correct, or PAC learning of distribution classes goes roughly as follows: that a distribution class is efficiently PAC learnable with respect to some distance if there is an algorithm which for every element in this concept class, or every distribution and every epsilon and delta, given access to an oracle, stop. What's this oracle? Now that's important. So it's important to stress that this oracle here is just the sample oracle. It's the oracle that takes kind of classical data that you can write on a sheet of paper, that you can have in your brain, that it could be on your computer, whatever. I mean, it's like classical data. So it's a quantum algorithm for classical data. And that's important to stress because well, it's dangerous, and one has to be very careful about the oracle access. That's kind of settings where people have access to QRAM or QSample, QPEX oracle. So oracles where the oracle access as such is very powerful, and where most of the power of the algorithm comes through the oracle access that you have. Here is just the oracle that takes classical data read into the quantum computer. So the input and the output are purely classical, and it's a quantum algorithm to assess the data. So given access to an oracle, output in time that's polynomial in all the parameters of the problem, with probability at least 1 minus delta, so probably a generator of a distribution d prime that is pretty much the same, so it's close to the original distribution in some distance, so is approximately correct. So again, the guy takes data and learns them and was supposed to spit out data from pretty much the same distribution, so pictures of cats and dogs coming in, and the task of the learner is to spit out new pictures of pretty much, and likely, probably, pictures of pretty much cats and dogs. That's kind of the setting of PAC learning of distributions. Now again, can there be a quantum advantage? So are there distributions that are efficiently quantum generator learnable with respect to the Kullback-Leibniz divergence and the natural sample oracle, which are not efficiently classical generator learnable, no matter what? Now, this is a relatively short talk. I did promise to keep it rather short, and that's also a bit due to the fact that I still have to do some of my QP submissions tonight. It's a bit of a tense moment, but I will give a hint of some of the elements of the argument. So on the highest level, of course, one has to show that that it's kind of quantum hard and classically hard and quantum easy. The thing is, there is a quantum advantage, and in fact, there's an exponential separation in computational complexity of the quantum over the classical learner under a simple and a small technical assumption that's common in the field. So the decisional Diffie-Hellman assumption for the group family of quadratic residues. So a quantum learner can indeed learn better, exponentially better in computational complexity than a classical learner. So what's the argument on the highest level? Well, you have to show, again, that a quantum learner can do that, can solve the task, and a classical learner can't. So you have to show that it's kind of quantum easy and classically hard at the end of the day. And those who have thought more deeply about this question, they might not be very much surprised to hear that it's actually more involved to show the classical hardness part than the quantum easiness part. So on the latter, we are standing on the shoulders of giants, in fact, the shoulders of Kearns and collaborators, who were like thinking in this context about pseudorandom functions, which are collections of keyed functions that cannot be distinguished from uniformly random functions by any polynomial time algorithm. So on the one side, you would have like a couple of points on the domain, and on the other side, you would have a uniform distribution on the domain, and there's no polytime algorithm that would kind of separate the two settings. So for our work, we had to kind of massage the kind of a known construction to get pseudo-random functions out, the Goldreich-Goldwasser-Micali construction, tailored to our setting to get the right type of pseudo-random functions for our purposes. Now, the construction goes on to kind of take seed randomness, like actual or like random strings, and to append the output of this pseudo-random function afterwards to give rise to a family of distribution that can provably not efficiently classically generate or learned no matter what. So these are kind of constructed distributions that are set up using ideas of pseudo-random functions so that no classical learner can efficiently, in computational complexity, learn the respective distribution. Now, the full argument goes deeper than that. It's a pretty involved hierarchy. It's a polynomial hierarchy. But at the core of this hierarchy, like in the machine room of the argument, is like a one-way function related to the discrete log. But then you think, wait, one-way functions in quantum information, we know how to deal with discrete logs and one-way functions. Shor's algorithm, I mean, Shor just won yesterday this wonderful, much-deserved prize, the Breakthrough Prize. That's together with Charlie Bennett from IBM. That's absolutely wonderful news. So due to Shor, we know how to break these one-way functions, and the argument is basically to use Shor's algorithm to like solve a discrete log in polynomial time and to kind of walk the hierarchy backwards and to walk this Goldreich, Goldwasser, Mikali tree backwards and to crack the hard-to-learn distribution class with a quantum computer. So it can be quantum learned, but not classically learned, making use of these ideas of pseudo-random functions. So again, quantum learners can do better. There is a proven quantum generator learning advantage. And not only that, quantum computers can learn better, but they can exponentially learn more efficiently than classical computers. So that's very encouraging. There's also no cheating, no funny access to funny oracles. There's no QRAM, QPEX, whatever. But there's it's a well-defined, meaningful learning task. The access is that to the sample oracle. There's classical data you can write on a sheet of paper and so on. And the quantum learner can learn exponentially more efficiently than the classical computer. In a way, that's encouraging in the sense that the field exists. There's substantial heuristic evidence that quantum learners can do better using like variation algorithms and so on. But it's kind of nice to see that in certain well-defined settings, one can have a proven advantage of quantum devices over classical learners. And again, this is like a mathematically well-defined setting, classical input and output, and it's an advantage in computational complexity. That said, the one liberty we took is that it's for a kind of a much fine-tuned distribution class. So it's not really pictures of cats and dogs that we're having here, but like delicate setup distribution classes. I mean, that's set up because it's like a complicated, it's kind of a very strong statement. So we took the liberty to set up these distribution classes. So it's a fine-tuned distribution class, but otherwise it's a perfectly fair setting. Also, it makes use of it's not very NISQI. It makes use of a full-fledged quantum computer in a way, but it shows that quantum computers in principle can learn distributions better. So there's a case for using quantum devices in machine learning. So that is nice. That's encouraging. And at the same time brings me to the second and shorter part of the talk, which is on the learnability of output distributions of quantum circuits. So we've seen so far that there is a case. We have a smoking gun if you want. So there's a quantum learning advantage. There's a quantum learning algorithms can offer concrete advantages in meaningful probabilistic modeling tasks, at least in principle, which is some great news. It's a good baby step and a good direction. It's surely not the end of the story, but it's a good step. However, again, as I said, the class of distributions has been rather fine-tuned, and the algorithms have to be honest, not very NISQI. To be fair, they require a full fault rate quantum computer, presumably, or something quite similar to that. So the next question is, can we set up a meaningful probabilistic modeling problem for which a general purpose, or better, a NISQI, quantum learning algorithm can provide some sort of concrete formal advantage over classical learning algorithms? So this is surely an interesting question, but it's not so easy to get a grip at. I mean, after all, like the advantages that we have looked at are pretty much fine-tuned, while the practical hands-on learning algorithms involve, again, pictures of cats and dogs, and they don't really admit such a kind of well-defined and precise mathematical description as we want that in our arguments. And also, they're usually addressed with methods such as, I don't know, restrictive Boltzmann machines, generative adversarial models, networks, or GANs, and so on. So to tackle this question, we need some sort of a vehicle to make progress and to address this question. And what could be more natural than looking at short quantum circuits in the first place, or rather at distributions that are being obtained by performing measurements in the computational basis generated by short quantum circuits. So again, this could be like quantum circuits that are the center of the variation quantum circuits that I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. So these settings, they have lots of knobs. We take data. That's a classical computer that takes these data and goes around. So the guy in the middle would be a quantum circuit. It's set up, you run it, and you take data and you create samples of the distribution when you do a measurement in the computational setting. Also, the quantum advantage settings that we have discussed, at least again briefly at the beginning of the talk, that create so much interest these days, that cannot be kind of classically weakly simulated, in the sense that you can't have an efficient classical algorithm providing samples from a similar distribution. There are also settings of this type. So these settings are often called quantum Born machines, that are hinting at the Born rule when that is being applied when you kind of want to compute the probabilities that you get in quantum measurement. When you have your circuit, you do your measurement, and you want to learn. Okay. One sec. Problem. There's a power problem. I sort this out in 1 minute.
Okay, no worries, Jens. I'll just pause here and let people post any questions you have in the comment chat box. Thanks, Hao Qing, if I got that right, for posting the question about quantum noise errors and how they enter the proof and how they will affect the advantage. I presume Jens in the first half of the talk is really imagining a fault-tolerant, error-corrected quantum computer. Although I suppose he would have more thoughts here to offer on.
Yeah. Here we go. So my cable is broken. Interesting. But I have another one. I'm in my office. So here's one. Very good.
Okay, great.
Very good. So that was silently and slowly running out of battery without me noticing.
Okay.
So that's a Born machine. You have a short circuit. You make measurements, and then that is kind of you can see this basically as a generator for the associated output distribution, which what's happening here? So for most of what we have in mind, we have like nearest neighbor output distributions circuits in mind, and you would run the circuit, and you would take measurements, and that's kind of the distribution you look at. So when we ask, can we find near-term quantum classical separations, what we look at is the task of learning the output distribution of a quantum circuit of that type with classical and quantum learners. So in a way, can you learn the output distribution? And can even a quantum computer learn the output distribution? So in other words, can a quantum computer learn the output distributions generated by other quantum computers? So equipped with this vehicle, we can refine our question a bit and can ask whether there's output distributions of local quantum circuits that are PUC learnable by both quantum and classical general purpose probabilistic learning algorithms. And now we know that these circuits are hard to simulate classically, right? So if the circuits are sufficiently deep, then there's no classical polynomial time algorithm that can create samples from a distribution that's close in, say, the total variation distance. But are they actually hard to learn? So if the circuit is very, very shallow, like if it's a depth 1 circuit, then surely this must be possible. That we have product distributions, we can clearly learn such distributions from not too many samples. For very deep circuits, again, quite clearly, we can kind of approximate any distribution that we want, and that's presumably not easy to learn. But at what precise point does hardness set in? So can we learn the output distribution of like quantum circuits, like classically or quantumly? And indeed, recent work has conjectured loads of things about this, that learning the output distribution of local quantum circuits may be hard for classical learning algorithms, and that is not so implausible given that it's hard to classically sample from such distributions, and also it's not possible to black box verify the kind of correctness of such distributions, meaning that there cannot be a device that takes samples and would kind of decide from poly many samples whether you have the right distribution or you are absent away in the total variation distance from this distribution. So there's lots of kind of folk knowledges and folk theorems and urban legends about the connection between learnability, simulatability, black box verifiability, and so on. So can you learn the output distribution of short quantum circuits? And this is actually quite a crime story. We have like lots of results on that question, like some ups and downs, some goes and no-goes, and some of them are actually quite maybe surprising and unexpected. So the first one is a kind of negative result, in the sense that if like a reasonable assumption is true, like if standard secure pseudorandom functions exist, then circuits that are like about linear in depth generate distributions that are already hard to learn. In fact, this is true in both in the generative sense, so where you want to kind of take samples and you want to be able to spit out new samples from the same distribution, but also in density modeling, where you want to kind of learn the actual output distribution as the learning task. And what is more, this is true both for classical and quantum learners. So this time, pseudorandom functions cannot be broken by quantum algorithms. So there's not a quantum advantage. Neither classical nor quantum algorithms can actually learn the output distributions of actually not so deep circuits, which are like about linear in depth. And this is a bit discouraging, if you want, that the class of distributions arising from computation basis measurements of circuits of that type are not efficiently learnable. The next result may even be more drastic, and that relates to the so-called statistical query model. So what is this? So learning algorithms are given access to an oracle, and this statistical query oracle is basically when queried a function, responding with some number which is guaranteed to be at most some tau far away from the expectation value of the function with respect to the target distribution. So basically, it's kind of taking expectation values as the input. It's actually quite natural in this context, as expectation values are usually like readily accessible, and standard learning algorithms for generative modeling, for example, training quantum circuit Boltzmann machines and so on, can be implemented in the SQ oracle. So when you basically kind of in the standard sense take data and it would kind of estimate expectation values, and would take that as the input of the generic learning task, then this would be like using SQ Oracle access in this sense. Now, strangely, if you ask, can I learn the distribution, or Puck learn the distribution in the sense mentioned earlier? So everything I say here is in the sense of Puck learning. Can you learn the output distribution that is being generated? And here, strangely, even log depth circuits are hard to learn from statistical queries that are used in generic learning algorithms, and that even holds for Clifford circuits. So, I mean, how much more simulatable does it get? It's a circuit of Cliffords and even log depth, and you cannot, having access to SQ orgs, not even learn the output distribution of that, even though you can almost kind of compute in your head it's log depth and Clifford circuits. That's really kind of funny and weird, but in fact, you cannot do that. That's kind of funny and intrigued us quite a bit. And we were thinking whether we could kind of understand the connection between simulation or classical efficient simulation on the one hand and learnability of distributions on the other hand. Now, the mother of all kind of efficiently simulatable quantum circuits is the Clifford circuits, and equipped with Clifford circuits, we ask the question how simulatability and learnability questions are precisely related, and how these kind of two forces come together, and ask, quite frankly, can the output distributions of Clifford circuits be efficiently Puck learned in either of the respective settings? Now, that's not entirely trivial, not even in the Clifford sense, because, well, I mean, clearly Clifford circuits are efficiently simulatable, but there's still quite many Clifford circuits, right? So it's not so obvious that you can efficiently learn not the circuit, but the output distribution being generated by a Clifford circuit. But in fact, you can do the homework and see what's going on, and you find that indeed, the output distribution of Clifford circuits of any depth, in fact, can be efficiently learned, Puck learned. And the reason for this is that the Clifford circuit output distributions are uniform over affine subspaces of the finite n-dimensional vector space F2 to the power of n. So over finite fields, this gives rise to an kind of affine plane. You can use a kind of variant of a Gaussian elimination algorithm over finite fields to basically solve the problem and learn the distribution. So Clifford circuits, or the output distributions generated by Clifford circuits, can be efficiently learned. And of course, they can also be efficiently simulated. Now, we know that if you go away from Clifford circuits, things get messy. These days we are much concerned with notions of quantum mechanics. We know that you can, with surface codes, you can do transversely, you can do Clifford operations, but when you want to get universal, things gets nasty, and you need T-gates to do that. But T-gates can't be natively done transversely in that setting, so you have to kind of take noisy resources and do magic state distillation to make nice T-gate resources from very noisy ones, and then you kind of teleport them in and uplift a non-universal scheme to a universal scheme by adding T-gates. So the pain involved in magic state distillation and the pretty enormous overheads in quantum error correction, they come along with a number of T-gates that you put in, but the more T-gates you need, the more painful the setting is, but it is what it is. More concrete to the point of simulation, we know that a small, like a logarithmic number of T-gates can be perfectly afforded in simulation tasks by virtue of the Gottesman-Nel theorem. You can efficiently simulate Clifford circuits both in weak and strong simulation. But if you start adding T-gates, then, well, it gets messier, but of course it's still efficiently possible to simulate the circuit if you have a logarithmic number of T-gates. And that's not very surprising. Say if you have one T-gate, you have that distribution plus that distribution, then you mix them, and done is the weak simulation where you want to create samples from the same distribution. So it's not very surprising that, again, Clifford circuits can be efficiently simulated, But if you add t-gates, then the computational effort will grow exponentially with the number of t-gates, but a log number of t-gates can be perfectly afforded in simulation, either in the weak sense, where you want to create new samples from the same distribution, or again, a similar one, or in the strong sense, where you want to have the probability distributions of the setting. So again, a small number with a small number of t-gates, you can still simulate the circuit, and also in a weak sense, like generate samples from the distribution. However, learning is very different. You have your Clifford circuit, you take one t-gate out as your resource, and you place it in the circuit. And in worst case complexity, I should say, interestingly, this becomes a hard problem. So a single t-gate renders learning hard, and while simulation is perfectly possible, so circuits with log many t-gates can be efficiently simulated again, but learning has become hard, and a single t-gate renders learning hard. There's actually a cute argument. It's related to parity learning with noise, where there's no noise in the circuit, but the t-gate kind of plays the role of the noise in the circuit so that the polynomial reduction can be done. A single t-gate in worst case complexity makes learning hard. So there's one thing kind of unrelated, but I can't constrain myself on the power of t-gates in this context. One day I should give a talk on the power of tea, or cup of tea. That is kind of related in mindset. So most of you will know that designs are ubiquitous. When, like, you guys at IBM are using doing randomized benchmarking, you would use two designs to do like the suitable random sequence. Designs are everywhere. So you want like finite collections of unitaries that kind of resemble the nice Haar averages in one way or the other. Now it's known that if you do random Clifford circuits, there are two designs that's used in randomized benchmarking. There are also three designs, so they're getting the third moments right, but they're not four designs. They kind of gracefully fail to be four designs in a way. It's kind of funny, but that's coming out. That comes in, like, through the representation theory of the Clifford group. But you can kind of add t-gates, and you can spice up the random Cliffords to arbitrary order designs. Now, if you have a big circuit, say a 1,000 qubit quantum circuit, and you want a 29 order design, you can ask, how many t-gates do you need to add to beef up, to uplift this kind of low order design, third order design, to a 29 order design? So there's 1,000 qubits, and you want to have a high order design. Now it turns out that you need a number, like 5 or so, of t-gates to uplift a low order design to an arbitrary order design for 1,000 qubits, independent of the system size. So you put in these kind of t-gates there, and this kind of t-gateness, this universality that kind of spreads out, mixes all over the place, and independent of the system size, you get an arbitrary order design. So we were just jokingly calling this quantum homeopathy works, because you can take this kind of t-gateness and kind of uplift this to arbitrary orders, and you can exponentiate this ad infinitum. Never mind. It's kind of interesting to see that here the kind of t-gates come in again in a strange fashion, that the number of t-gates you need to uplift a small order design to an arbitrary order design is independent of the system size. So one t-gate to learn the output distribution of one t-gate is hard, but also a small number of t-gates uplifts designs to arbitrary order, which is kind of interesting in its own right. So that's we call this quantum homeopathy works. That's for the preprint for the German CMP that will come out anytime, actually over the next week. We didn't dare to use this title, but never mind. So okay, good. It's a good moment to stop. We had this little technical lapsus in the middle. I really apologize. I can't reconstruct on what side how that happened, but we are back. So in the second part, we looked at the connection between simulation and learning, or the learnability of output distributions of quantum circuits. And that makes a lot of sense, given that they are like the guys in the middle of common machine learning algorithms. They are like the quantum part of things. So clearly you want to see how this quantum part fares in generic learning algorithms. And for that reason we looked at the learnability of outputs of quantum circuits and had the first rigorous insights into the learnability of outputs of quantum circuits. And there's ups and downs and kind of surprises. And we learned that this connection is intricate, but we also found obstructions to proving quantum advantages, because sometimes it's just as hard for the quantum device than for the classical device to learn the output distribution of a quantum circuit, which is kind of weird if you think about this, but it is what it is. So this is kind of a very much mathematically, pedantically minded work. The questions we address in our work are not entirely new. There was a quite beautiful paper that our friends in Edinburgh kind of came up with. To be fair, they didn't have so many technical results, but they really, to the point, asked many interesting questions on the connection between simulatability, learnability, verifiability, and so on. And since this is all about Born machines and quantum advantage supremacy, they called their paper the Born supremacy, like relating Born machines to quantum supremacy. But then we sat down and we have all these kind of technical results that basically address these questions rigorously and find the identity of the learning task of Born distributions. We thought a natural follow-up title for our work would be, we found the identity of this, so would be the Born identity. Yeah, I didn't get this past my collaborators, so we had a very technical title for our first publication of this. Anyway, this is part of a bigger program, but time is moving on, and we had this technical lapsus. But I should maybe just say that this is part of a bigger program in our group to think of learning tasks, machine learning inspired tasks in a rigorous mindset. There's a lot more to say about this, but maybe for another time and for another day. Good. So in this talk, we looked at the question of learning tasks with quantum computers. We know that quantum devices do something. We want to do something interesting with them. We ask questions of what we can do with near-term quantum devices, whether they can tackle problems that we might be interested in, tackling practical questions. And it seems most natural, given the state of affairs that machine learning is everywhere, that quantum computers could possibly help and assist in tackling meaningful and mathematically well-defined learning tasks. And that was our motivation to look at the question whether quantum devices can help. And very positively and very motivatingly, we found that not only can quantum computers do better, but there's an exponential advantage in PAC learning, in PAC distribution learning of quantum devices over classical learners. So quantum computers can learn exponentially better than classical computers if we are willing to kind of fine-tune distributions kind of as much as we want. But that's a very motivating result of a kind. Motivated by this, we thought whether we can kind of make this more near-term, relate this to NISQ devices, to short quantum circuits that are being measured, and we found that there's a lot to say about learning the output distributions of short quantum circuits, but we also found obstructions in learning the output distributions of local quantum circuits. Sometimes you can't do it with SQR because you can't even do it for log depth circuit, which is kind of pretty weird if you think about this. Also, somewhat strangely, we found that while you can learn the output distribution efficiently for Clifford circuits, a single T-gate renders learning hard in a way, which is also kind of a bit of a striking result. So on a higher level, we find that these super fine-tuned, delicate, highly structured problems have the potential to allow for quantum advantages in a very strong sense, like a exponential separation for a well-defined distribution class. For these kind of dodgier, dirtier, like short, like random quantum circuits as we have them in NISQ devices, there presumably are strong obstructions. You can't have a quantum advantage for the unstructured setting. So at the end of the day, there's the question on the desk. So how much structure is really needed at the end of the day to have a meaningful advantage in learning tasks of quantum devices over classical devices? And while I don't know the answer, I would love to know the answer. And what we are doing is rather kind of an invitation to a beginning of a program. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions you might possibly have. So thank you very much, and sorry for the lapsus, whatever happened there in the middle. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jens, and thanks to everyone as well. Thanks for your attention. We'll keep the questions short in the interest of QAP deadlines. So we have maybe one quick question that came up earlier was about, this is all in the case of ideal distributions. How can we begin to think about the effect of noise in NISQ devices on the N in NISQ for the conclusions here?
That's a wonderful question. So again, concerning the first part, there's quite little to say about this, meaning that it's a very strong statement as an exponential separation, but presumably that really requires a full quantum computer, just in the same way as in the machine room of this algorithm is sure. So that can't presumably tolerate any quantum noise. That's really non-NISQy if you want. For the second part, we also motivated by short circuits and like by circuits as we have them, like log depth or like linear depth circuits. But they are, as we model them, not noisy circuits. But like the way we kind of the proof goes with parity learning with noise, that kind of hints at the suspicion that some of these arguments would carry over, and that actual noise would be like our modeled noise in the second problem. So I would think that for reasonable error models, some of the results could carry over also to the noisy setting. That said, as we formulated them, they're not yet for the noisy setting. So that's what we have here. But I would say that for the last part, there should be clearly an avenue to move forward to like short and noisy circuits of a type. And there's also reasonable error models around that are nice, easy to tackle. Like if you have like layers of circuits and then layers of depolarizing noise, there's quite something you can say about that. So that I'm very hopeful that you can say something about that type of error model.
Excellent. Great. I think just in the interest of time, I will like to leave Jens this last minute here for you if you want to share any other news, comments, announcements, etc.
I'm fine. I wish you all the best for the QRP night. It's going to be a long night for many. I can't see any other questions. There were lots of questions in the other chat, but we've moved around to this chat here.
Yes, I think we will try to get those to you after the rest of this. So I think with that, Jens.
Thanks so much for this, and good luck. Enjoy the rest of the night if you can. And thanks for the invitation. That was great. And again, sorry for the lapses in the middle.
Yeah, and thank you, folks, for tuning in. This talk will stay recorded, and you can go back and rewatch it. Subscribe to the Qiskit YouTube channel to know what's coming up, and we will see you next Friday at noon Eastern Time.
Thank you. Have a good night.